you go. Should be good to go.
Cool.
Cool.
Hey folks, in this episode, I'm very excited to welcome our guest today, Mike Indovina. So Mike is a recording, mixing and mastering engineer who has worked with hundreds of artists in various genres, including punk, rock, pop, hip hop and more. And with over 20 years of studio experience, he's gained a reputation as an engineer with sharp attention to detail. He's also an author of a #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Mixing Mindset, the step-by-step formula for creating professional rock mixes from your home studio. I'll put a link to that in the podcast notes. Mike, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Mark. It's great, man. I'm doing well.
Fantastic stuff. So for the audience listening, I sort of made contact with Mike because I had been listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. And I reached out to Mike because being a music podcast, it'd be great to have another music podcaster on the podcast itself. I don't know how many times I can say podcast in one sentence, but I think I did about 3 or 4 there.
It's a bit of a tongue twister.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. And another great thing about your podcast is I've actually had guests from your podcast on this one. So Elena Asnick from episode 98, I discovered her on your podcast, Daughterboard Audio, and
Awesome.
reached out
She's
to
great.
her. And yeah, fantastic. It's such a good episode and the audience loved it as well. So obviously, audience listening, check out and listen to this one first, but then do go listen to episode 98 and also the episode on the Master Your Mix podcast as well.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. It's great to have you on board. As I say, I think this is probably the first time I've interviewed another podcaster, a music podcaster that is. So this is going to be great. I thought it'd be great if we just start with your journey as a mix engineer. So you've been doing it for over 20 years. I think one sort of key question would be, what is the one thing you know now that you wish you knew 20 years ago when you started?
It's a good question. I mean, looking back at my career, I think the biggest thing that I would say that, like, if I could change anything, maybe this is a better way of answering that question, is like, if I could change anything, the only thing I wish I did better when I was younger is like get smarter at networking, to be honest. It's funny, like, so I played in bands all my life, and like I hustled really hard with my bands, and like I was very determined to make my bands like get signed or whatever, like, and I would hustle my ass off, and I had no shame to like embarrass myself like promoting my band. But like for whatever reason, when it came to like promoting the studio side of things for me, I was a little more reserved about that. And I think it was just because it was just me, you know. Was it like I didn't have like 4 other guys in my band who could like also do some of the work for me, right? So so to some degree I was like a little shy about that getting started with this. And I very quickly realized, like, as the years went by, maybe not quickly, but like as years went by, like there was all these bands that like my band used to play with that like went on to have really great success and stuff. And like I kind of kicked myself. I was like, man, like had I, like, we were always tight with these other bands. Like, you know, we play shows with them all the time, like see them very, very frequently. It's like, I should have been using that opportunity to just like get better at being a friend with people and like being top of mind at all the times and letting them know like that I had this other, you know, aside from being in a band, that I had this other passion and this other thing that I was working on in the background. Because who knows what could have happened, right? Maybe like maybe I could have worked with some bigger bands very earlier on in my career or something like that. But yeah, so definitely, like, I think for anyone getting into this industry, it's like networking is definitely a big thing. And I just wish I had been better at it and like not as shy about it, you know?
Yeah, networking's huge, isn't it? And I know exactly what you mean. Running a podcast as well, a lot of getting the podcast out there, as you probably well know, is networking and speaking to individuals, because there's only a certain amount you can do or money you want to plow into sort of online advertising. But networking's huge. So you mentioned that obviously you've been sort of 20 years. How do you think it's changed? So I remember when I was in a band and we would network, we'd meet and to chat with other bands, and then we share each other's music as you do. And that's still pretty much the same now, I think, a lot of it. But do you think networking, I suppose social media makes it easier now with the
oh yeah, like I feel like my bands were like pre-internet, you know? It's like it makes me feel super old thinking about it. But and funny enough, like, so I had one band that, you know, it was kind of like my main band for years, and we had a deal with Universal, and like we did really well for being this like small Canadian band. And to as of like last week, there was like nothing on the internet about us, you know, like it was just like we existed pre-YouTube and stuff like that. And then my guitar player, like just last week, happened to find this like box of these like 8mm home films that like he, you know, someone was apparently filming us this entire time. And like, so now we have this like big back catalog of like all these videos and stuff. So it's cool to see all that. And like, we're going to get all that uploaded. But anyway, that's just a big aside. But yeah, definitely social media has made it a lot easier to connect with people, right? Like back in the day, it used to be that you had to you book shows and you just you emailed people and you
Mm,
just like all you did was just like hang out at shows, even if you weren't playing, you went everywhere and you just got to know people and like, you'd kind of see the same faces at shows and you'd, hopefully strike up a conversation with those people and maybe that brought you in, got you another show or whatever, right? So there was a lot of that, and there was like also like a little bit of like internet stuff where if you looked in the right places, you'd find like the forums where there'd be bands looking for people to connect with or shows or promoters or whatever. So there was definitely that. And I think social media has now made it a lot more accessible, a lot easier to find those people. And now you can literally look up like, you know, some label and look up like A&R with that label name and you'll find whoever that A&R person is. It's a lot easier to like find out who
mm,
the people in control are and, still take the same approach, just email them, write them, whatever,
yeah.
befriend them. Right. So I definitely think that's part of it. I think people are going to, at least where I live, like, I feel like shows aren't as frequent as they used to
Mm,
be. Or at least like they're getting smaller, or maybe just because I'm older now, like there's like a different vibe to the crowd. So where it's like, we're playing bar shows where it's like 19 plus or whatever. And like, people are there to just drink, not necessarily like be there for the music. So, I don't know. It's like, you just have to kind of like, after you do it enough times, you kind of see the same familiar faces. And then you kind of get to know like, oh, that's who that person is. Or, you know, yeah, I don't know. I think like having an old school approach to marketing and to networking is still very, very valid, but
yeah.
also if you understand the social media side of things too, then it gives you another chance to promote yourself easier.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because what you said about social media, because I remember when I started the podcast and I released my own music, and when I was in a heavy metal band, as the audience know, because I pretty much say it every episode, I think.
Nice.
Yeah, I was in it for about 8 or 9 years, and I remember we used to do the social media thing and emailing, and it's only recently that I've gone back to focusing on actual creating a mailing list and like generating and building that mailing list rather than building followers on social media. So it's very interesting how how networking changes over time. So with regards to that network, and I mean, I don't want to hang around on it too long, but
Yeah.
do you think it's different? I suppose it would be different networking as a band or as a sort of audio engineer. Do you think you would do you take a different approach? Would you still go to a gig and approach artists as an audio engineer with like, hey, I mean, you wouldn't be as blasé as saying like, let me mix your record, but
Some
or
people
something
do
along.
though,
Yeah, I know.
I think it's like, I think no matter what, you just have to, nobody wants that like that slimy salesman kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
Where like it's like, hey, like give me your money, I want to work with you, so like that doesn't ever work well for anyone. So I think it's just like genuine, like if you just come from it as a genuine person and just people like compliments too, it's like, hey,
yeah,
great show, like you guys are awesome, like when can I see you next? Or like you just kind of like, maybe that's all you need to do to just like show someone that you care about their music enough and you want to see them again, and then maybe see them at that next show and it's like, hey, like, yeah, I saw you guys at that last show, like can't wait to see you again tonight, whatever. And then you can maybe strike up a longer conversation, like sometimes you
mm,
have to play that long game. But at some point you do have to say like, okay, like, yeah, I am, if you ever need help, I'm a recording engineer, like, I can help you out.
yeah,
um Let them, I think the important thing with networking is you have to let people know what you do, but not be like pushy about like, give me your
yeah,
money or like that kind of thing, right? Because if people know what you do, then sometimes they'll reach out to you when you least expect it because they have that in the back of their mind that, oh yeah, like Mike is an audio engineer, Mark is an engineer as well, like he can record my band, so yeah, there's been lots of gigs where I've had that kind of thing happen where out of nowhere someone called me because like I told them I did something years ago, and when the time was right, they remembered me, right? So
yeah.
yeah, it's just like, just meet as many people as you can. You meet a lot of friends along the way, which is really cool. And then yeah, eventually, good things can, like, work can happen, right? Um and then from there that creates its own snowball as you build your portfolio and as you start to um do work for one local band, then the next local band hears about it, and then it kind of creates that snowball from there.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, it's kind of, I think I heard it on another podcast where someone said, I don't know if it's the right term, but like friending them into submission. Submission might be the wrong word to use, but
I like
you
it.
kind of, yeah, you're kind of doing that. And I think it's the best way to do it. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I frequently get people messaging me on social media offering to do X, Y, Z for me. It's just straight off the bat saying, I'll create this for you, create that for you. And I'm thinking, you haven't even like shown any interest in what I do.
Oh, all the
You know,
time.
yeah, man.
And the
I
worst is
get
when
it.
you get like that canned message where you just know it's like sometimes they don't even fill in their own blanks, and it's like, hey, first name. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Or I get it a lot where they'll put my. I suppose it's easy to do because technically I do have like a first name for a last name, or they'll put it around the wrong way. But I always respond with a podcast now when they say, "Oh, your podcast is great. I've been listening to it." I was like, "Oh, well, what's your favorite episode?" And like, what was the favorite topic in it? And then it's just like tumbleweed
yeah.
thereafter, which I don't know, I might be being quite mean, but then again, if you're going to send these emails out, you're going to get it. I suppose this kind of segues nicely onto my next question. So I was listening to the latest episode. So today is July the 30th for the audience listening of the Master Your Mix podcast, and it features Dean. I'm going to try and pronounce it correctly. Hajikristu.
Yeah, I believe that's how you say his last
There
name.
we go. Yeah. And it was really interesting, actually. You were discussing freelance portfolios versus the studio runner internship. And I thought it was a really cool conversation. So you mentioned there about networking and building a portfolio. Can you tell our audience what you think would be sort of your advised route in modern audio engineering? Do you think freelance, or I suppose each one has its place, but which one would you be an advocate of?
Yeah, I think each has its own place. And I think that like the traditional way of building your way up the studio ladder, it's becoming harder and harder to do it because these big studios are starting to close down and there are just fewer opportunities there for that kind of stuff, right? But then one thing that I learned very early on in my career was that like I never worked at like a big studio, like I was never at like one of the biggest studios in Canada or anything like that. But like I worked for some pretty mid-level studios. And one of the things that I caught onto pretty early at a lot of these places was that they were typically owned by an audio engineer themselves. And I kind of like, I would start at these places sometimes as like a runner, intern, whatever, and I would work my way up. But I kind of very quickly realized like that's as far as I can go. I'll never be the head engineer of the studio because the head engineer owns this place, and like whenever there's a bigger band coming through, they're going to be the one that takes it because they want that credit for themselves, right? And at least this is from my experience from the studios I was working at. I kind of caught that, and I realized like there was this limit as for how high I can go in the studio company rank, and they were also in charge of like my money, and like they would tell me how much money I was going to make and this and that, and so like I felt very restricted that way, and so that's kind of when I started to like go the freelance route because I realized like okay, like if at the end of the day all I'm trying to do here is like build up a portfolio to like show that I'm skilled with this stuff, then like I can do that. I'll find local bands and I'll start building up that portfolio. And at that point, like there's no one to tell me what gigs I can and can't take or how much money I can earn. And so it kind of just allowed a lot more flexibility for me. And it gave me too, like, I was now on my own schedule. So like I could take on different gigs. I could do live sound. I could do studio work, kind of. I did a lot of different jobs in the audio industry because I wanted to just get my feet wet, trying to take on as much as I could, see what I enjoyed. And that led me to a whole bunch of different paths. And for, in some ways, maybe that was a slower way to go about doing it. But I think in the end, it gave me a flexibility that for the lifestyle I want to live was the right choice. Right. So, yeah, I mean, all that to say for people that are listening who are trying to get into this industry, I do think that like, sure, if you can get into the big studios and like you have that drive where you don't mind working really, really long hours for very little pay and you can afford to do that. If you are in that situation and you find the right mentor, then I think that can lead to some incredible things. But it also has to be the lifestyle that you want, right? And I think that that's a really important thing. I had the opportunity to work for a bigger producer. I won't say his name, but he and you probably heard me talk about this in my podcast. It was like, he wanted me to fly across the country, and like when we were talking about work hours and stuff, he was like, you're gonna work 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and for like no money. And this was like a chance to have big credits under my belt, but I was like, no, like, and at first he was like, and I thought he was joking, and I said to him like, okay, haha, like, if I'm going to move across the country, like, 20 hours a day, like what are the real hours? And he was like, no, you have another 4 hours in the day. You'll figure out how to live. And I was like, what about sleep? So like, to me, that was just like not the lifestyle I wanted. And so, yeah, between like the places I was working at and that situation, I was just I guess I got jaded about the old studio model and was just like, I'm just going to do it on my own, and just see how that rides out. And I think in the end it worked for the better for me, and like I learned a lot about marketing along the way,
Yeah.
and I learned a lot about my like running a studio as a business, which is another big thing. Yeah, there was a lot that I learned along the way, and it's it's slowly building up to something really great for me. So I'm happy with where I'm at right now.
Yeah, amazing. I remember on the episode, I remember you saying that about the 20 hours and the 4 hours in a day. It's crazy, isn't it? It's almost because they are not like hen's teeth, as we say over here in the UK when something is that rare, but because there is a demand for it, it's supply and demand. I guess these producers and engineers can say, they can be like, well, if you don't do it, I'll find someone else like
Oh yeah,
tomorrow who would want to take this opportunity. So
and the funny thing is that I said no, and then I know someone who said yes shortly after, and she lasted like a week and was just
wow.
like, fuck this. Like, it's just not
Yeah.
like, hope I don't know if I can swear on your podcast, but
Oh, that's fine.
okay,
No.
cool. But yeah, she was like, no, like, this is not a way to live, who
Yeah,
cares? You have
yeah.
credits under your belt, but like, at the end of the day, like, if you hate life and like, you can't enjoy things, then what's the fun in that?
Yeah, exactly. I'm with you on that. Like with the sort of low and slow route, as it were, and like building that portfolio and that and whatnot. Did you start out dry hiring studios, or did you immediately have a space?
I had like, I was working out of my parents' basement for the longest time.
Mm,
Like I would just find local bands and be like, hey, like my parents aren't home on the weekend, come record, It was like it
yeah,
was literally like that. Like I would try to do whatever I could, and my parents were they were very supportive and like they were very tolerant, I'd say. And they let me have a lot of bands over that like, you know, some of these bands were god awful, but they tolerated the noise, and like they
yeah,
were like, okay, like we see that you want to do this. So like do it, test it out, see how good you are at it, like how passionate you are about it. And so yeah, I got my start doing that, and then yeah, I worked out of a couple local studios. I tried to find places where I could make noise because it was much easier than having to
yeah,
skirt around my parents all the time. But yeah, I started working out of like a couple little smaller spaces and just kind of worked my way up and found a couple different studios to work out of whenever I needed to. Eventually, I did have my own space for a while, and then I had that space for I don't know how long now. It was probably like 6 or 7 years or something. And then right before the pandemic, I closed it, which was great. It was like perfect timing.
mm,
And I just dedicated like at this point now, I mainly do like mixing and mastering projects, and I have a home studio which works great for me, and I can do that. I don't necessarily need to have bands over at the house, and
yeah.
I do most of my work is international anyway at this point. So yeah, I kind of just did that, and that worked out better for me too because now I don't have like a commercial place that I'm responsible for, and rent big lease somewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think a lot of audio engineers do start out with that sort of their parents' place and their parents sort of saying okay and then doing that. I mean, I was quite lucky in that I found a rehearsal space and they would let me use their space, and I basically said, okay, well, you can use it, I'll use the equipment here, and I managed to do that. But yeah, it kind of segues now nicely onto the next part, which is you mentioned there about being a mixing and mastering engineer. And what we're going to sort of focus on now for the sort of the main chunk of the episode is mastering, because
Cool.
it is a huge pain point, I guess you would say, of the audience, because and there is so much information online I find with regards to mastering and myths and misconceptions and whatnot.
Mhm.
So I think it's a really good one for our audience sort of delve into. So you'd sort of like tell us more about the role of a mastering engineer and what do you look for in a project? So are there any red flags that you look for in a project?
Sure. Yeah. So as far as the role of a mastering engineer, I think the way I could best sum it up is that like your job as a mastering engineer is to prepare the music for release in the best way possible. And I think that mastering kind of has two components to it. There's the audio component to it, and then there's the production component of it. And when I talk about production, I'm not talking about like audio production. I'm talking more about like manufacturing production or
Mm,
distribution production, right? So the audio side of it is like you get a mix, you make it sound better. That's the easiest way I can sum it up, right? There's a lot of different parts that go into that, like EQ, compression, limiting, all that kind of
hmm.
stuff. But you know, the mix, the mastering audio portion of it is really just taking a track and making it sound better, making it so that it translates from one set of speakers to another better, finding a better balance overall, getting clarity, that kind of stuff. So that's how I would describe that part of it. And then there's the manufacturing production side of things, which is more delivery specs. So, making sure that everything is at proper levels or proper file format for manufacturing. If people are making CDs or if they're going to a digital distributor, making sure that everything is good on that side, that your tracks are going to sound good on that platform as well. You've got like metadata embedded in the files so that, when someone plays their CD or whatever in their car, like your song and artist name comes up and all that stuff. All of that kind of thing I think that's the side of things with mastering that I think people forget about. Like we tend to focus more on the audio side of things, but there is like that back end of like making sure that it's like all these little details that often get overlooked are actually well prepared and crafted. So yeah, that's what I think of the role as a mastering engineer. What was the other part of your question? Was
it's like red flags. So it's an interesting question. Sort of like if someone was to approach you, or a potential client, an artist was to approach you with a project, are there any sort of red flags that stand out to you with regards to a mix before it then goes to mastering?
Yeah. So yeah, okay. I'm glad you clarified that. Like, there's problem client red flags. That's one thing. But I mean, as far as like preparing a mix for mastering, the biggest thing I would say there is like, often people will want to like over compress. That's the biggest one, I think. Like over compress, or have tracks that are like way too loud. And I don't mind. Like, I'm one of those mastering engineers that like I'll tell people like try to make it so that your peaks sit around -6, whatever, right? But if you give me -3, I don't care. You know what I mean? Like I'm not gonna be like harping on you for that. I'll work with it, but the reason why I would suggest -6 is just because it gives a lot of headroom so that mastering engineer can do what they need to do, and they're not going to be clipping, or they're not going to like, they have room to work with. So that's one of the things as far as levels go. And the other thing is just like, yeah, don't over compress or don't over limit your mixes, because when you do that, you kind of you paint yourself in a corner where like there's only so much that can be done, right? And oftentimes it's like people just trying to make like a fake master to impress their clients and say like, listen how loud this is, and it sounds just as loud as your other favorite artist. But like, that's not the stage for that. That's what mastering is about, So I think it's just like, yeah, if you don't know what you're doing, don't try to make a fake master. You know what I mean? Like, I get why people do it, but I think like if you're gonna do that, then just send an unlimited, uncompressed version to your mastering engineer, and then they can hear both versions and work off whichever works best.
Yeah, it's a question off the back of that then. So you would sort of tell a potential artist, a client, to basically leave that sort of mix bus free then, not to compress, not to limit, just leave it free of any processing.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of compression is fine. If that's part of the sound, like I know a lot of mixing engineers that mix with bus compression on, and I do that too. That's fine, right? But I think that like I go very, very gentle with my bus compression. I'll have like 1.5 to 1 ratio, and maybe 2 dB of compression at most. In just very random spots of the song. So like that's very transparent. But like sometimes you'll get a mix where someone's like got like -10 4-to-1 ratio like throughout the entire track, and then it's just like everything's slammed and there's nothing you can do with that.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I'm fairly certain on every mix I've done, I've got the SSL channel plugin on pretty much every mix bus with those settings there. I think there's one kind of like classic setting with that one. I can't remember what it is. It might be an all the way slow attack and then a fast release, or it might be the auto. And then it's like 2-to-1. It's a fantastic piece of kit. That's all I got.
It's funny. I'm looking at my SSL bus compressor in front of me. Like I have a physical one, and yeah, it's exactly that. It's like slow attack, fastest release.
Yeah. I had the pleasure of working with a duality test for about a year or so. Absolutely loved it, and yeah, running everything through that. I'd love to get one. Can you not get them? I mean, have you got the big duality desk, or have you just got like
no?
The
I just have like
with the...
so I don't even have like, mine's like a Stam Audio SSL bus clone, but it's just like the 1 unit rack mounted thing, but it works great. I like it a lot.
Yeah, it's a fantastic piece of kit. Once again, it's one of those plugins that I mentioned so much on the podcast.
I use the SSL bus, like the plugins. I use those all the time. Like, to be honest, it's funny. Like I do have a lot of outboard gear in front of me. Unfortunately, you can't see it on the camera here, but But I had all this because like when I had a studio that I was recording bands out of all the time, I like tracking through outboard gear, but I actually kind of hate mixing and mastering with it. Like it's kind of just sitting in front of me, like almost untouched most of the time, because I just like the plugins are so much easier. They sound often just as good.
Hmm.
Sometimes I think they sound better than my hardware. Like sometimes like the difference is so negligible. It's like I'll just stick with the plugin for the sake of recall or whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
sometimes like the hardware does do the magic, and I guess it's like, okay, well, I guess begrudgingly I'll use the hardware because it's like that just has something that I can't replicate in software. So then I'll do it. But I kind of hate using outboard gear because then like the recall part of it sucks.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm 100% in the box. And I remember having to recall. I was using this old Audient desk, and I had to go and recall a session. I was just like, no, no, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through this? I don't have someone working with me who's able to do it. So yeah, I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah.
One thing you did mention then, when I sort of clarified the red flags question, was about clients. So this has gone off on a bit of a tangent
Yeah, of
now.
course.
For our audience listening who want to then start working with artists and clients and whatnot, what red flags do you look for in a potential sort of project or as an individual client or artist?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that can come in so many different forms, but usually like usually when you have a client who's telling you how the project's going to go and like this is what we need, you're going to do this or whatever, like if it's like against my normal like process, then like that's immediately like, okay, I know this isn't going to work for you. you know um it's very, 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 very rare that I have someone that does that. So that's one thing. Or like if you get an artist who's like not really done their project, but they're like, I want to submit something to you now, and then like we're gonna re-record something, we're gonna add something after the fact, and then we're gonna send you the new version. It's like, oh no, that's like, send me it when you're done.
Mm.
Stuff like that will come up. um I don't know, or if someone's like telling me their price, like that's usually like another way too, right? If especially if they're like super lowballing you or that kind of thing. Um, but fortunately, I don't have too many of those situations come up.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and also like, I mean, and maybe this goes without saying, but there's also, and I'm sure you know this too, like there's so many like email scams that people,
yeah,
like you'll get the same email like over and over again, and you kind of realize like, oh, this is a scam. So if you see those kind of things, like the
yeah.
limo scam is like a big one for audio engineers, where like they'll get you to like hire a limo or like some taxi or something like that for their clients. And so if I see stuff like that, I'm like, nah, you're trying to just get me to lose money.
Yeah, I had one. I think it was last week where they wanted to fly me out to Hawaii for 2 weeks,
Yeah.
and I think I did respond, and I was just kind of like, no, yeah. And there was another one I kept getting as well, which was someone who was trying to give me a piano, and they were just kept getting it through the website, and it was just like my father's died or something along those lines. I've got this piano, I really want to give it to you, and I was just like, I don't understand why you, obviously some sort of bot or something like that, but it just seems so random. But yeah, I totally get what you mean with the limo. Yeah, the Hawaii one. When I first read it, I was like, that sounds really nice. But
Yeah.
ultimately, like they did have a presence on Spotify. And the music sounded okay, but yeah, it was very, very weird,
That's
very weird.
interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard of that one. There's another one that's like
Mm,
there's another one that I've seen where it's like people that will write like custom birthday songs for like kids or something like that,
oh
and
yeah,
they need like a mixing engineer for that project, or a recording engineer for that project. So yeah, I don't know. Just if something seems fishy to any of the listeners, like if you get an email where it seems fishy, too good to be true, just look it up, and I'm sure you'll quickly find out if other people have the same
yeah.
experience with
What are
that.
your thoughts on if someone asks you about your equipment that you use? Does that like, is that a bit of a red flag for you, or is that like that's an okay question?
Um, it's funny because like, yeah, if someone asked me that, truthfully, if they ask me that, like I don't really have a lot of like mastering gear, you know what I mean, like outboard
Mm.
gear. Like I have like my SSL, whatever. I've got a lot of great gear for recording, great preamps and stuff like that. But like I always just tell them, like, if you like, if you heard what's on my portfolio and you like it, then you're gonna like
Yeah.
what you're gonna get.
Hmm.
My portfolio speaks for itself at this point. And I also tell people too, like, if they want to if they want to do a whole album of mastering with me, or of mixing, whatever, I would just tell them, like, just do one, just choose one song. Let's start with that. If like you're hesitant,
Yeah.
let's do one song. I'll knock it out of the park for you, and then it'll make it a no brainer to do the rest of them. And it
Mm.
doesn't matter what gear I have. Because you're going to get the sound that you need. And if I can't get that sound, then I'm not the right person for you.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good. I like that answer because it's something I've listened to. I listen to other music podcasts, and it's something that routinely comes up. And it's kind of like if they ask you for a gear list or a step by step play of what you do, which I guess is a fair question. But in my mind, when I see that, I'm kind of like, this person is potentially going to be more trouble than this project's going to be worth, sort of thing. And much like you with the response I give is just like, you've seen the portfolio, let's do a track and see what happens. I'm not going to sort of list out every piece of equipment I have. Or I think I had one which was like, you haven't got a gear list online. And my response was, yes, that's correct. You know, I don't.
It really doesn't matter, right?
Yeah,
like,
I know. It's crazy.
The plugin sounds so good these days. And I don't know that, like, I guess if you're doing like attended sessions, then maybe that matters more, because then like someone wants to see that gear and they want to see that you're using it. But at the end of the day, like, I mean, I could make up not that I do ever have done this, but like I could make up a list of amazing gear that, you know, it's not like people are going to hear the master and be like, oh yeah, I totally heard that you use this Sontec EQ or, you know, whatever. Like, they don't notice that stuff. At the end of the day, it's like, however you get the sound is all that matters, you know?
Yeah.
Like I recently, just for fun, I for my students, I was doing a mix where I had like used a whole bunch of like, you know, I guess premium plugins or whatever you want to call them, right? Third-party plugins. And then years later, I went back and I did like a entirely like stock plugin mix of it. And it sounds just as good, you know? It took me way more time to do it with the stock plugins, because it was just like, I had to like finesse it a little bit more, and those plugins were maybe a little more tricky to maneuver around, or like, you know, like whatever. But at the end of the day, it still sounded just as good as the premium one. So I imagine if I did the same thing with outboard gear, it'd be the same result. You know, it's like, it doesn't matter. It's just you get to the finish line however you get to the finish line. You know.
Yeah, I think that's quite refreshing for the audience to hear like that, and it's something once again that's said a lot. Is like the end product is what people are listening to, and they don't really care too much what sort of, like you say, what compressor you've slapped on the drum bus or anything like that. You know, if it sounds good, it is good. It's that sort of thing, isn't it? That's why
and it's like, and the only people that actually care about that stuff, sorry to cut you off, the only people that care about that are audio engineers, I guess, you know. And it's not even because like they notice a sound quality difference. I think it's just like they're just curious, you know.
Yeah.
But it's like, my wife knows nothing about any of the gear that I use, and she's just like, yeah, good song, sounds good, right? Like, she's not like, oh, I love how you use that SSL bus compressor, and you know, the 2-to-1 ratio really made a difference, you know.
I can really hear that tape saturation that you put on the end there. You know, it's making that bit of difference there. Yeah, excellent. And so moving on to another question with regards to mastering. So our audience is new to mastering. They want to start doing it themselves. They want to go down the DIY route. What concept of, because you mentioned there are two different sort of aspects, really. You've got the sort of like the finessing side, and you've got the actual back end side. What part of or concept of mastering should they start with or master, for want of a better way of putting it, first?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to this is a bit of a loaded answer, in a sense that, like, I think the key thing to master, if you're going to learn how to master, is is the tools, you know, and not just like how to use the tools, but more importantly, like how to manipulate those tools to get the sound that you want, right? So like, really, like, it's one thing to know an EQ, because like, at the end of the day, like, mastering is a really simple, I think it's simple once you get the hang of it. It's like EQ, compression, some limiting, you know, maybe some saturation, that kind of stuff. And most mixing engineers know how to use an EQ, but like, they don't know the frequency spectrum, you know, like in the sense that, like, a lot of people know, like, okay, if I adjust this knob, it turns up that frequency, and if I turn this knob, it adjusts the frequency itself. And they'll sweep around until they hear a problem, and then they'll make an adjustment, you know, and like based on whatever their ears tell them. And that's a valid way to do things. But I think that, like, if you want to become a really professional mixing engineer or mastering engineer, you have to understand like what characteristics of sound for different instruments apply to certain frequencies, certain frequency ranges, right? So it's like, if you want to bring out like more of the stick attack of a snare drum, you're going to be looking in that like 2 to 3K range, and then or if you're looking for more of that smack kind of sound of it, not just like the woody sound, then you might be looking around 8K or that kind of stuff, right? So if you start to like identify these different characteristics of sound, it allows you to quickly address the issue, as opposed to like sweeping around trying to find a problem, you know. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is like really committing frequency ranges to memory, understanding how to use a compressor properly, and how a compressor, like how the attack knob changes the amount of transient energy in a song, that kind of thing, or how the release can make a song pump, or, you know, like make something sound choked off, and that kind of stuff. When you understand those kind of those tools in that way, then it allows you to use them the way that you hear in your head, right? Like, I think one of the biggest issues that a lot of people have is that they don't have a clear vision, or often they either don't have a vision at all for what they want the final product to sound like, or they do have a vision for what they want it to sound like, but they just don't know how to get the tools to do that, you know? And so, yeah, just really like committing to memory those frequency ranges is a big thing, I think.
Yeah, I remember when I was starting out, and when you mentioned about the frequency ranges, I think if you go on Google and were to type that in, you can get these A3, A4. Well, they're not going to be on your screen, but you can get them printed as well, where it's got the frequency spectrum, and then it's got like a table underneath with the actual instruments, and then it will give you in the instrument in the frequency range what the sort of timbre of the instrument is there, or what sort of sound you're going to get if you start boosting in that range. So, audience listening, I don't know what you would search for that.
Yeah, well, actually,
frequency ranges, something like that.
I was going to say, if people want a resource for that, I have one on my website that they can download for free. So if anyone visits masteryourmix.com/blueprint, I've got basically a cheat sheet that has a whole bunch of EQ frequencies to pay attention to, how to use compression. It's all one guide that's all free, so people can sign up and download that.
Fantastic. Yeah. I'll put a link in the episode notes for that as well.
Awesome, thanks, man.
Because that'd be fantastic. And I like what you said there about vision as well. So do you think with regards to vision, is that where a reference master or reference song will really help when it comes to sort of your DIY when you're starting out with mastering?
100%.
And also I think just in general as well, I think when you're mastering.
Yeah, I think references are one of the most underutilized things when it comes to audio production, because I think at the end of the day, we all have this idea of what pro quality sounds sound like, you know? And I think that's often based on our own history of listening to artists that we enjoy, right? So like we look at the music we love as that standard of like things should sound as good as this, you know? And often when we're writing music, we're writing in a similar style often because people take after their influences, but like that's kind of our benchmark for what something should sound like. And I think that references can be used in so many ways throughout the audio production side of things. Like it can be used to help you with arrangements of songs. It can be used to help you with tones. It can be used to help you with when you're recording, like determining the character of a sound that you want. So then maybe that influences your miking positions, that kind of stuff. It can be used to help you with your editing decisions, where like, how tuned a vocal should be or how tight a drum pattern should be. As far as mixing goes, like it could be used to help you with levels and panning and compression and EQ settings, like that kind of stuff, or effects. And then from a mastering perspective too, like references can also be used to help you get that frequency balance that's going to translate. Like it's not about, one thing I tell people all the time is that it's not about making a mix sound great on your studio monitors. Believe it or not, it's like, it's not about how great it sounds in your room. It's about making a mix that translates. And references are one of the easiest ways to do that, because if you hear that your mix has a ton more low end than your favorite songs when you play them on your speakers, then that means that when you play it on a car that has like a subwoofer, it's going to be way, way, way too big. So it's like, maybe you need to thin out the low end in your mix, because that's going to make it sound better in your car or any other set of speakers, right? So I think references are one of these really important tools that there's so many different applications you can use them in. And certainly like I'm constantly using reference tracks with all of my projects.
Yeah, I really like the fact that you mentioned about songwriting and arrangement there as well, because I use a reference track when I'm arranging, when I'm songwriting. I have I think I've said this on Instagram, I might have been a story or something, but I have a playlist on Spotify. When I hear a song, I'll chuck it in this playlist, and I think actually I really like that sound, and then I'll chuck it into a template, and then I'll start creating, not trying to create it like verbatim, trying to recreate what they've done, but I think that's highly underused or underutilized. I've spoken to a number of producers, and they're just like, I've never thought of doing that. Actually using it in the arrangement phase. I use it in every phase, mixing and mastering as well, using a reference. And just to echo what you said there about, it sounds great on your studio monitors, but you got to think a high percentage of listeners, a lot of them are just listening through their phone or their laptop speaker, which I can't do myself. It's just, it is offensive to my ears, but that's me just being really, really picky. But yeah, 100%. But Mike, moving on, there's sort of our last question of today, and I like asking this one when it comes to mixing and mastering. What do you think is the biggest myth or misconception in mastering today?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think that like the biggest misconception these days is that that you need to this could be like a whole episode in itself, but but that you need to like deliver at the specs that like Spotify or Tidal or whoever tell you need to deliver at, because like like Spotify will say like, oh, minus 14 LUFS is like kind of what you should be aiming for. But if you master it at that, then when you go to another platform that doesn't have the minus 14, then it kind of sounds weird. Or when you master or when you make CDs, then it's like too quiet now, So like these days, like if you actually were to analyze like the top 5 or top, I don't know, probably top 100 songs out there right now, and you actually analyze their levels, they're significantly louder than what Spotify recommends.
Yeah.
And they even go over 0 in terms of intersample peaks and stuff like that. So, I think that just goes to show that like, these are recommendations, but they're not like requirements, they're not like a hard wall kind of thing. So yeah, I think, you don't need to necessarily worry about that. I think there's so many great tools out there. Like there's Plugin Alliance has one called this Streamliner, I believe the plugin's called, that allows you to like hear what it sounds like on all of these different platforms at their delivery specs. So it'll take your current mix with however loud it is, however, whatever it sounds like, and then it'll apply the codec and whatever normalization settings these delivery services will use, and it lets you hear what your mix will sound like. So I think just doing your due diligence and checking it with something like that is really helpful, because if it sounds like crap, then okay, maybe you can adjust something a little bit, right? But most of the time, if you've got a pretty good mix, you've got a pretty good master, it's gonna sound pretty solid.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, and because episode 99 is one where I just go through LUFS, and I basically echo what you said there about streaming platforms and how it says minus 14, but just make it sound good ultimately. Do it so it's conducive to the music and it sounds good. You mentioned there about codecs. Would that be similar to the one that's in Isotope? Because Isotope have got an AAC and an MP3 codec.
I think so.
Or is it slightly more?
To be honest, I've never used the one in Isotope.
Okay.
I've only ever used like the Streamliner, and I just use that as a quick reference check. But yeah, I imagine I'm pretty sure Isotope has one that is the same concept.
Yeah, I imagine it will be. There's a website as well for the audience listening, if you don't have that, where I think you can upload it and it'll tell you exactly how much it'll be turned down by. But
yeah, I think Ian Shepherd has one. It's called Loudness Penalty, and that'll tell you like how much it'll drop it or whatever. But even that could be deceiving to some degree, because you might see these numbers and get scared by it. But it's at the end of the day, it's like more about how it actually sounds, I think.
Yeah. Do you audition using the Apple codec, the Apple droplet? Do you do that?
I just use Streamliner. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And half the time I don't even worry about it, to be honest, either. I've just done so many now that like I kind of know what to expect. If a mix comes to me sounding super, super compressed to begin with, those are always the ones that I feel are the most at risk. Because everything is just like hard walled and like already sounds compressed and limited. So then like to add more of this compression or whatever these algorithms do, then it might mess with it a little bit more. But if you have a fairly dynamic mix, it'll usually translate pretty well.
Yeah, and I asked this question, of Elaine. Do you just do the sort of one master, rather than do one for each platform? Is it just like one master?
Yeah, I always do one master.
Yeah,
I mean, cool. I guess good. for bigger label projects and stuff like that, they'll ask for more. But I generally just do the one master, because it's the if you give people too many options, they'll inevitably, like, especially like the artists, like half the time they aren't paying attention, so they might send it to the distributor with the wrong file or that kind of thing. So
yeah. And once again, I think I said this to someone the other day. It's like when you're uploading that master to DistroKid, CD Baby, whatever it may be, you can only upload one anyway.
Unless you pay for more, you can pay for more, but like no one wants to do that.
No, exactly. Right, we're coming towards the end now, so I think it'd be great if you could maybe tell our audience a bit about sort of maybe the Master Mix podcast and some other bits and pieces that you do.
For sure. Thanks, man. Well, so as Mark was saying, I run a podcast called the Master Your Mix podcast. Very similar to what Mark's doing here. I'm interviewing lots of different engineers throughout the industry. Had a lot of great guests in the past. We've had people like Sylvia Massey, Andrew Sheps, David Bendeth, a whole bunch of other great people. Basically that podcast kind of started as an excuse for me to just like talk with cool people and learn more about their process, kind of, similar to what we're talking about here. It's just been a great podcast, from a learning perspective and for a teaching perspective as well. So it's been very cool to run that. So definitely recommend people check that out. And then I also run a website, masteryourmix.com, which is where I help out musicians with creating pro sounding recordings from their home studio. And I've got courses and coaching programs where I help people throughout the recording, editing, and mixing process. Primarily focus on mainly rock music, but yeah, lots of great resources on that website, a bunch of free downloads, as I mentioned earlier. So definitely check that out. And if people are interested in learning more about maybe working with me from a mastering perspective or mixing perspective, they can check out my production website, which is MikeIndovina.com. And I've got my portfolio in there, and there's a contact form on there if people want to reach out to me.
Fantastic. There we go, folks. I'll put links to all that in the episode description. And I haven't listened to the Andrew Sheps episode yet, so that is going to be bookmarked for this week.
He's awesome, man. I love that guy.
Yeah. I had a chance, I think, to go and attend one of his sessions, but I can't remember why I didn't go. Probably some reason, can't remember. But yeah, I'm going to go listen to that one. It's my gym soundtrack, listening to your podcast and a few others as well in the morning. So,
thanks, man.
Yeah. No, it's good. I love it. It's great stuff. It's great. It's fantastic. Audience, do go check it out. And you've probably seen, if you follow the podcast on Instagram, to the audience, you'll see me. I share the posts and whatnot. So hopefully it'll send some more people your way, which would be amazing. But Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
This has been great, man. Thank you.
Yeah, the audience are going to get loads out of this because, as I say, mastering, and it's kind of what we're focusing on the podcast at the moment now for about four or six episodes, maybe longer, with regards to mastering. So I know it's been brilliant, and a big thanks again for joining me today. Anytime. And I'll catch up with you soon.
Anytime, man. Love to come back.
Cheers, buddy.